again, I'm Josh Coomber, and in this podcast, I'm going to talk about some common myths about vegetarianism, as well as some deceptive foods you would think are vegetarian, but actually aren't. And spoiler alert, one of them is most college students' favorite beverage. So, in the first podcast, I addressed two common misconceptions that I had fallen victim to about vegetarianism. The first one was that vegetarians can't get enough protein, and the second was they can't get enough fat. I also mentioned that I've met several people who have become vegetarian in hope of losing weight. I explained how the first two are myths, but I never really touched on the myth that being vegetarian will make you lose weight. When you actually put some thought into it, it's fairly obvious that not eating meat doesn't entail losing weight. Someone could only eat sweets and junk food and still be vegetarian, but that certainly doesn't mean they're eating healthier or that they're going to lose any weight. Yet unfortunately, this is still one of the main reasons I see a lot of people becoming vegetarians. Ironically, if your eating habits consist of eating junk food or binge eating or what have you, then chances are you're actually going to gain weight. Even with how common that myth is, to me the biggest myth about vegetarianism is that it's more expensive. While produce can be expensive, pound for pound meat is much more expensive. On top of that, in my experience, when you like to eat meat, you tend to overeat it. Casey never stops reminding me about this one. When I buy scallops, chicken, bacon, whatever meat at the grocery store, I buy it with the intent for it to last at least a few days, which sadly is rarely the case. I'll end up making a massive scallop and bacon pasta, tell myself that's what I'm eating for the next week, and by the next day it's gone. Scallops and bacon are just my weakness, whereas Casey will make the same pasta with broccoli, peppers, onions, mushrooms, chickpeas, and a bunch of other delicious shit, and it will last the two of us a week. It's still delicious, but it's a quarter of the price and it ends up lasting a lot longer because I'm not powerless to resist it. Essentially what I'm saying is, while I hope for a pound of meat to last longer than a pound of vegetables, it really rarely does. The exception to this rule is that if it's frozen meat with a double-sided list of ingredients that I can't even pronounce, then it sits in my freezer for years until I eventually find it and question why I even bought it in the first place. Now that I've gotten some of the common myths of vegetarianism out of the way, it's time to move on to some foods that are surprisingly not vegetarian. I'll divide them into three categories. The first category is animal fat, which sounds like something you would obviously recognize in your food, right? Surprisingly enough, there's plenty of foods that you would never guess contain animal fat. Refried beans, for example, something Casey and I ate a lot of in our tacos instead of meat, unless otherwise stated, is made with lard. The taste had just started to grow on me before Casey found out, and taco night has never been the same since. Several barbecue-flavored chips, namely Lay's, contain chicken fat. Thankfully, I'm not a big chip eater, so that knowledge means nothing to me. Boxed cake mixes and Hostess products contain beef fat, which completely screwed any chance of Casey ever baking me a cake. The next category is the infamous gelatin. For those of you who don't know, gelatin is for the most part made of animal bones. A big one in this category is margarine, which leaves very little choice of butter substitutes for vegans. Another big one is a lot of cheeses. It's unfortunate because when Casey and I go to order pizza, she has to specifically ask if their cheese is made with gelatin, and most of them don't even know. Finally, if you're vegetarian, I hope you don't take your coffee with sugar, because refined sugar isn't actually naturally white. It's made that way using animal bones. So I'm sorry to burst that bubble, but once you go black, you'll never go back. And the last category is fish byproducts, which are found in random things. Pretty much anything that says omega-3 on it, namely orange juices and breads, will have a fish byproduct of some sort in it. And of course, saving the best for last, a lot of beers and wines, particularly those from Britain, are made with fish bladders to filter the yeast. So if you're a vegetarian, just do yourself a favor and switch to Scotch. In conclusion, being a vegetarian isn't going to make you lose weight, and there are a lot of deceptive foods and drinks out there that seem vegetarian friendly and aren't. Thanks for listening. I'm Josh Coomber, and tune in next Friday at blogusmaximus.wordpress.com for my interview with Casey, where we finally get a vegetarian recipe cooking.